Right, I'm going to start the presentation, which Jalal and myself are going to be giving this afternoon. This is the second of our webinars. We had a very successful one this morning with lots of questions and lots of comments. So we're expecting the same this evening as well, or this morning, wherever you are in the world. During the presentation, please feel free to ask questions. I'm going to pause at the end of some of the slides after I've shown them. Hopefully you're now seeing my presentation. Excellent. The only problem I have is I can't see. Right, I have my control screen now. So yes, after some of the slides where we're giving some key information, I'm going to pause and ask if anybody has any questions at that stage, and we'll take those, give as brief an answer as we can, but then leave plenty of time at the end of the presentation for more questions as well. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, four things, four main headings. First of all, an overview of the whole CMC scheme and the standards within it. A slide about how we went about updating the standard documents to show the authenticity and the robustness of the process we follow. And then some slides about preparing for triennial assessments with the new standards, and also some new documentation which we're in the process within QAC of developing to help to streamline the assessment process, to make it easier for IMCs to understand the process and take part in it, to make it easier for the assessors to do their assessment and provide their report. David, you have your hand up. You have a question already?
David, you would need to unmute, please.
Sorry about that. First question was simple. Are these slides going to be available after the session?
Yes, they will.
Okay, thank you. Second is an apology. You may have seen some movement behind me. We have just picked a wonderful day to do construction in the room next door to me. So I'm doing my best for my ears to screen it out. I'm not real successful, but you will see people, and I apologize in advance.
Okay, no problem.
Don't worry, David. During the whole of my presentation this morning, I had two grandsons roaming around the house, and I worried that any minute they might burst in, but fortunately they were more well-behaved than usual.
Okay. We're going to make the recording available as well to all those who attended, correct?
Yes, exactly.
So other than the presentation, there will also be the recording. David.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, whichever session anybody joins, we can make the recording available to them, and all the slides will be available to everybody. And another comment to make is this is only the beginning of our process of awareness raising for the updates. This webinar is not the end. Cello and I and our teams will be available to help assessors and IMCs to be ready for assessment from October onwards under the new scheme, the new standards. So this is just an opener. Hopefully people will learn enough from this, but there is opportunity for more questions and more help. And from this morning, we also already identified the need for one or two more guidance documents to be provided as well. So we may touch on those later on. Okay, so yeah, the third part of the presentation will be about preparing for the assessments, for both IMCs and assessors. And then Chalal is going to talk in much more detail about the new standards, the manual, the competence framework, the code of conduct. And then hopefully plenty of time for comments and questions afterwards. So the CMC Manual is the basis of our documentation. This is the guideline, the rule book, if you like, for IMCs, including sections on governance and management, about how the institute should conduct its CMC assessments, the processes that need to be followed, how they should be carried out. The standard also defines exactly our principle of equivalence within Icmci. That is the principle that we have basic core documents produced by Icmci, but any institute has the choice of either using those documents within their institute or developing their own documents, but being able to show that their documents are equivalent to those of Icmci. In other words, that they map properly to the Icmci documents. So that is our principle of equivalence. And that together with the core standards is what allows us as a global organization to allow reciprocity of the CMC standard between our member institutes. Because every member institute, if you like, is working from the same rulebook. So that a CMC awarded in one country is just as valid in another country that has a member institute. The other two parts which the manual contains is the definition of how Icmci assesses institutes for their compliance with the Icmci scheme and standards. And then the last element of the manual is to do with the International Standards 17024, which is the certification of persons. And when an institute, a full member institute certifies a CMC, then of course they are certifying a person. And that is where this international standard applies. Every member institute has the opportunity to be accredited by Icmci to this standard ISO 17024. Icmci is a self-authorized accreditation body. And as I said, an institute can choose to be accredited, but whether they are or not, the CMC manual completely maps to the ISO 17024 standard. And when you look at each of the clauses of the manual, you'll see the applicable clause of ISO 17024 as well. Just as an illustration of what we're talking about, so you all know where to find these documents, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, and Kazema is going to show you the Icmci website and where you can find these documents we're talking about.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you on the screen today. You need to go to our website, cmc-global.org, and under the MC designation menu, you will see the CMC page where you can see all the documents related to the new competency framework. I'll go down where you can see that this is the documentation also and supporting documents for the competency framework, where you can click on any of the links here related to the documents that will guide you through the process.
Okay, so what Kazema is showing now are the documents which are applicable until October. And then lower down the page, you see those documents which will be applied from October onwards this year. So if you scroll down, Kazema, I think we'll be able to see,
Yeah.
These are the documents which we will be using from October onwards. And as I said earlier, also, there will be some new updated assessment documents as well, both for institutes and for QAC assessors to be used in the assessments from now on. Okay, thank you very much, Kazema. I'll share again and get back to the presentation. Okay, are you seeing my screen again now? Yep. Okay, good.
Yes.
Super duper. Okay, so apart from the CMC manual itself, we have two types of appendix to the manual. The first type are actual standards, which have to be complied with. The first of which is the Competence Framework, which Jalal will talk about in more detail later on. The next is the matrix of preferred and acceptable assessment techniques. That is the different techniques, the different approaches that institutes can take in assessing CMC candidates. And that matrix shows the different ones which are acceptable to Icmci and those which are preferred. The third appendix you see is the Code of Conduct, the new Code of Conduct, which we'll talk about in more detail later. Another part of the standard is the Common Body of Knowledge. This is a document which defines the various areas of knowledge that we would expect CMCs to know. And this is a document which we may be working on for the future to expand, to identify areas that might be missing, but it's something which an institute can look at in terms of deciding the sort of training which they would want to give to consultants and maybe CMC candidates in order for them to build their knowledge moving towards CMC certification. And then the last of these standards is the additional prerequisites. That is the educational qualifications, the number of years of experience and so on that we expect a CMC candidate to have in order to be successfully certified. So that's a set of standards which are appendices to the manual. And the other set of appendices that we have are more like guidance documents. The first three of which are to do with the Competence Framework. There is a background document which provides the philosophy behind the updated Competence Framework and the principles behind why it contains what it does and how it's structured. Then there is a one-page overview of the Competence Framework, which is probably very useful for introducing the framework to people, and also a PowerPoint presentation that can be used to introduce the Competence Framework. The next guidance document is a Glossary of Terms, which is fairly empty at the moment. We received some suggestions this morning to help enlarge it, and we will be working on that glossary to include as many terms, definitions as are necessary for people to fully understand all the terms and the expressions that we use in our standard documents. There is a guidance document on the general requirements of ISO 17024. This would be particularly useful for those institutes that are thinking about becoming accredited by Icmci. There is a guidance document on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is a new key element within our code of conduct. We talk about societal responsibility based largely on those UN SDGs. So there is a guidance document there. And there I mean, that's just an introduction. If you want more guidance, the UN does actually supply quite a lot of information about its sustainable goals. In this morning's presentation, one of the participants actually gave us a very useful link, which I hope, Kusemi, we might be able to capture and send to everybody as well, which is a more detailed description of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the last document is a guideline on anti-bribery. In our Code of Conduct, we talk more specifically about the OECD document on bribery, which is mainly internationally based, but we've developed a guideline document as an appendix to our manual, which is much more helpful guidance in terms of the sort of consultancy assignments that a consultant or a consultancy company might undertake. So that's the list of guidance documents and the standards and the manual which form our CMC scheme. Do we have any questions so far about those documents? And also, by the way, if you want to raise a question but don't want to sort of vocalize it, please put your questions in the chat box, and we'll pick them up as we go along. Alice, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. So as you were talking, I was going through my manual here to match up the appendices with the documents you were talking about. And unless I missed it, what we currently don't have is the guidance on UN Sustainable Development Goals, the anti-bribery guidance, and the other one I didn't see was a statement of equivalence. Is that?
Okay, well, to answer the question, first of all, the statement of equivalence does not appear as a standard or guidance document within our scheme. It's obviously, that is a document used by institutes and assessors during the assessment process.
Okay.
The other two documents are, as far as I'm aware, are available on the website. Kusema, can I ask you to go back to the website and let's have a look just to clarify that?
Yes, sure.
Sorry, they are linked at the end, Alice.
Yeah.
And it's the two documents in one line, guiding documents.
Okay. So that's coming up though, but that's okay. So I just never saw those. Okay.
Maybe you look to the other part before that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Be careful to scroll to the right part.
Exactly.
We left the current documents up on the website at the moment because obviously assessments are being carried out to those documents.
Right. So those are new documents then.
Yeah, from October the 1st, I hope, we will remove those previous documents and just have the new ones up on the website.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Right, thanks, Kusema. Okay, let's get back to this. Okay, So thank you. Okay, the process we followed in developing the updated standards. First of all, we started just taking the existing scheme, the existing standards as a basis, because there was nothing wrong with them. They were fine, they were robust, and they worked. But we felt the need to update them in specific areas where the world had moved on from 2014 when this set of standards was developed. And we'll talk in a bit more detail about what we felt needed updating in just a while. We carried out some research with clients to find out what they wanted from consultants. What were the things that made them happy in terms of using consultants and getting good results? We considered other standards, frameworks, and codes of conduct from similar professional organizations. And we considered the sort of changes that have taken place in the world since the previous standards were developed. Things like new technology that's come on board, changes in management practice, and also changes in societal values. And we felt that we needed to reflect all of those things within the new standard. I'll finish the slide, David, and I'll come back to you. So we produced updated drafts based on the outcome of the research. These were reviewed by members of the Professional Standards Committee over a period of quite a few months. And then we updated our drafts and submitted to institutes for comment. And again, we got some feedback, which helped us to provide the final versions, which were submitted to the board for approval and were published at the annual meeting last year in October to become fully enforced from October this year. David, your question.
Yes, excuse me. Yes, Nick. Are the findings from the Voice of the Customer project, what they want from a consultant, are those available?
I guess, yeah, I guess we can make them available, can't we? I'll have to consult with Celal about this because we certainly kept results. And I'm not sure whether we ever produced a sort of a short summary of them, but if we haven't, maybe that would be useful to provide.
If you can, Nick, it would be appreciated, just because of some efforts we got here in the US.
Okay.
Nick, during the previous period of PSC work, which was mainly focusing on the revision and development of the new package of CMC Competence Framework, we definitely implemented a survey to collect the voice of the customers. And we have considered all those inputs in the new revision. And I will check if we have a specific report on that. And if we have it, we will send it to David.
Okay. Yeah, that might be helpful. Let's have a look at that, Celal, and I'll see. I may have something in my records as well, but we'll consult afterwards, and David will see what we can find for you.
Okay.
And for any others who are interested in that as well. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that basically that was the process we went through. It took us, believe it or not, 3 years. But I think there were 3 years well spent. And of course, that's not the end of the line. I mean, these documents, these standards are written, they're in place. But that doesn't mean to say that they're actually set in concrete. And if we find the need to provide updates, then that is something which you know, that the QAC will feed back to the PSC, and I've no doubt PSC will be prepared to consider whatever updates we deem necessary. We've already said that we need to update things on the body of knowledge and so on. So we're aware of some of the improvements we need to make. Okay, so let's move on to preparing for assessments under the new scheme with the new standards. There are some fairly standard things which an IMC has to do anyway. The first of which is that an institute, when it receives its notification that it's up for a triennial assessment, should look at the report from its previous assessment, whether that's a full member assessment or a triennial, a high trust assessment. That report will probably contain, if not some rectifications, it may contain some recommendations or some suggestions. And the Institute should look at that report and make sure that it has taken action or made decisions about what it's going to do on each of those things. And this raises an important point for institutes about document control. One of the issues that we have found difficult for assessors and institutes when beginning to carry out an assessment is, in many cases, the personnel within the institute have changed from the time of the last assessment, and the documents, like the report and the other documents that the institute submitted, may easily have been lost because there's no central document control system within the institute. This is one of the things that we really want to recommend very strongly to institutes, is to make sure they have a central corporate document control system in place so that documents don't get lost or go missing when personnel change within the institute. And it makes it much easier for the assessors and for the institute if all of that preparation is done, starting as soon as the notification email comes out, looking at the report, seeing what was recommended or suggested, and making sure that you're able to show the actions that have been taken. Then, of course, now with the new standards, it's important to be fully conversant with the new CMC Manual, especially those bullet points 1.2.3, 1.2.4, which are to do with the more overall governance of the Institute, not just about the CMC process, but about the whole structure and governance and management of the Institute, because assessors will be looking at those items in addition to just the CMC process itself. Then the Institute will use a statement of equivalence to do a gap analysis and put corrective actions in place where they're seen that they're not complying with all the items in the statement of equivalence. Now, what is being developed at the moment by QAC and will be in place within the coming weeks are two updated documents. One is the statement of equivalence, which is now being updated to include not just the CMC process, but all of those background elements within the Institute, its governance, its management, its structure, its committee work, and so on and so on. So that enlarged statement of equivalence will be sent to the Institute with the notification email, and the assessors, the QAC assessors who will be allocated, will have an assessor checklist, which is exactly equivalent to that statement of equivalence. So the checklist will contain every single element that is on the statement of equivalence, which means that the institute being assessed will now know in advance exactly those topics which the assessors are going to look for, which we hope should help them to prepare themselves for the assessment in advance. Okay. And also we are developing a more streamlined report for assessors as well, combining the current set of documents that assessors have to complete into one comprehensive document. We have a draft version of it developed at the moment, and our friends in the South African Institute have very kindly accepted that they will be used as a pilot for their upcoming assessment to try out all these new documents, statement of equivalence, the assessor checklist, and the new reporting format, in order to see how it works and enable us to finalize a new set of documents that are aimed at streamlining the assessment process, making it easier and less painful for IMCs and more efficient for the QAC assessors. So we hope that all sides will see some benefit out of the development work that's being done.
Nick, this pilot will be next month, as far as I remember.
Sorry, will be
next month or very soon?
I believe that
pilot.
ILSA is preparing to do that assessment very shortly.
Yeah, okay.
So I think maybe even within the next few days, but certainly within the next few weeks, definitely.
Okay.
Okay, so obviously the IMC and those within the IMC responsible for CMC assessment and the governance of the CMC process need to study the updated competence framework and the matrix of assessment techniques and the code of conduct to make sure that the institute is fully compliant with those standards. Apart from the statement of equivalence, the institute also receives a document called the Basic Facts document. This is where the sort of basic information about the institute is given, the name, the officers responsible, and so on and so on. And also some sections where the institute can show ICMCI where it has some best practices in place and the challenges that they face as well. So it's the beginning of the documentation that the assessors will look at. And apart from that, there's also a fairly standard list of background documents from the institute which assessors like to see in advance. And this list is provided to the institutes when the notification email is sent out. And it's very helpful for the assessors to receive those documents from the institute in advance so they can review them. And that gives them more time to get into in-depth assessment when they actually do the assessment, whether it's on-site or virtual. So those are the things which go out to the institutes and expected to be submitted to the assessors before the assessment takes place. And then, of course, there is the agreement with the assessors for the arrangement, the dates and the timings and the assessment plan, and then getting ready for the assessors to either join online for their interview sessions and so on, or in the future, we'll be getting back to on-site assessments as well. And we'll talk more about the difference between on-site and online assessments later on. As far as QAC assessors are concerned, obviously making sure they're familiar with the QAC reference guide and assessment process. These are two documents that QAC has developed to help assessors. The reference guide gives, if you like, all the guidance rules for carrying out the assessment. And the assessment process is a series of process maps to show the stages that need to be followed during an assessment. Obviously, assessors need to be familiar with the new manual and the new appendices as well, so they're able to ask the right questions on site. And then, as normal, after the notification email has been sent to the Institute, the assessors will get a copy of that notification email, and they will contact the Institute to finalize all the arrangements for submission of documents and for the assessment plan and so on. And then they will prepare their assessment checklist based on the standard document that we have. Before we move on, any more questions on what we've talked about in terms of preparing for the assessment? Okay, good. Let's move on.
Nick, I just want to emphasize that
Yep.
we are doing these webinars both for IMC representatives and assessors at the same time to reinforce the transparency and consistency.
Thanks, Jalal. Yeah, good point. Okay, so an overview of the key updates before I hand over to Jalal to talk in more detail. The main areas where updates have taken place are to do with IT, firstly. The first item is those personal IT skills which consultants should be aware of and using as much as possible to help effective communication and efficient administration. And here we're talking about things like Microsoft Office or the Google equivalent. We're talking about communication tools like WhatsApp and Zoom and Microsoft Teams and so on. And any other similar tools that consultants can use to help communication with the client and with consultancy teams, to help with the administration of the project, to help with the control of documentation and so on. So those personal IT tools and techniques that consultants can use. The second item to do with IT is awareness of an ability to apply latest IT technology for diagnostics and solutions. And here we're talking about things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on. That's not to say that we expect all consultants to have an intimate knowledge and be able to use and apply artificial intelligence or machine learning or stuff like that. But they should at least have an awareness of a knowledge of how it can be applied in a client situation, and the knowledge of where to go to get the applicable expertise if it's required within the project. So we will be looking for CMC candidates to be able to demonstrate those two facets of IT skill in the future, because they are things that are being demanded by clients for sure. The next item of update was about interpersonal skills. And it's definitely been recognized over the years that the emphasis by clients and consultants has moved from being concentrated on using the right tools and techniques, following the right processes, to be more of a concentration on building relationships and having the right interpersonal skills to be able to work effectively with clients. And obviously, that's not to lose the technical side of the job or the process side of the job, but this element of interpersonal interaction has become more and more important as managerial approaches have changed. So we expect CMCs to be aware at least of the principles involved in emotional intelligence in terms of self-awareness, social awareness, the ability to control and manage social interaction. So there are some elements of that interpersonal skill now built into the competence framework. Within the code of conduct, we've added specific areas about societal awareness, which is where the UN SDGs come into play, and there's now much more specific mention of those within the code of conduct for consultants. We have built into the new competence framework also elements to do with holistic and transformational thinking. That is, the ability of consultants, no matter what sort of consultancy assignment they're carrying out, to be aware of the big picture of the surrounding context in which the assignment is being carried out. In terms of the ecosystem or the business environment in which the client operates, so that the consultant, we expect to have more awareness of how their project fits into the big picture of the client organization. And also, because we live in a what we call a VUCA world, a world of great volatility and uncertainty, the ability for consultants to be able to help the client in transformational thinking, to be alert to changes and even upcoming changes, and to be able to work with clients to be flexible and agile to adapt. And then lastly, we have built into the competence framework a clear integration with the code of conduct and with the ISO 27700 standard as well, guidelines for management consultancy, so that there is now a complete integration between competence, code of conduct, and the consultancy process outlined in ISO 20700. So that's the overview, which Chalal will go into detail later. For the code of conduct, we have reformatted it into 5 areas of responsibility: to the client, to society, to their own organization, whether they're a singleton or a partnership or work for a large organization, responsibility to colleagues for support, and responsibility to the profession to uphold our standards. So within the area of responsibility to the client, what we're recommending within the code is to follow the guidelines of ISO 20700, which sets out very clearly how a project should be correctly carried out. And to do with the responsibility to society, as I've mentioned earlier, applying the principles of the UN Society Development Goals, the anti-bribery recommendations. Now we mentioned the OECD document, but actually more appropriate is the bribery guidance document, which you'll find on our website, which is much more applicable to consultancy assignments, whereas the OECD document deals more with sort of international bribery situations. So our guidance document's probably more useful, both in IMCs setting out their code of conduct and in assessors assessing how the institutes are following the code. Okay, so I won't ask for questions here because Chalal is now going to go into a lot more detail anyway to cover those points. Over to you, Chalal.
Thank you, Nick. So if there is no questions at this moment, I will continue with more details on the competence framework with more focus on its structure and overview. So I hope you can see my slide on the screen in full screen mode. It doesn't work in just a moment.
Yep, that's good.
Yeah, if it is okay, I can continue. So it didn't turn to full screen mode just for some reason, I don't know. So the structure of the competence framework have four main titles or sections or groups of competences, let's say. One is business insight and attitude. The other one, practice capabilities. And another one, behavior capabilities. And the last one is code of ethics and professional conduct. In the business insight and attitude, there are two areas of focus. One is client, functional and sectorial knowledge, more focused on the client and its business. And the other dimension is consultancy and consulting business insight, more focused on the consultancy itself, the content of the service to be provided. So this is combined with the title Business Insight and Attitude. Then we have practice capabilities, which include assignment and engagement management methodologies, which are also detailed in the competence framework. And the second sub-dimension is consultative capabilities. In the previous session today, in the first webinar, we received some comments or questions or suggestions that it would be better if we include the definition of some terms like capability, competency, and capacity, etc. So we will add those words or those terms in the glossary. So consultative capabilities are also mentioned in the competence framework. The third title is behavior capabilities, focusing on personal interaction as described by Nick in the first half of the presentation. Personal interaction with the stakeholders within the client, like colleagues, professionals, and the client internal stakeholders, and managing the relations with them, and intervention skills. And the other dimension under behavior capabilities is consultative behavior. Again, more focused on the consultants and consultancy service. And the code of conduct, code of ethics and professional conduct is the other title in the overall structure. So if you
can
yes.
I, sorry to interrupt.
Yes, please.
We had a request to see whether you're able to go to project on full screen at all.
I tried, but it didn't work, unfortunately. I hope you can see it in full screen. Is that okay now, Nick?
Yes, now it's okay.
Okay, perfect. So let's continue. So in the more closer look at the competence framework, we have this structure. On the left-hand side, we have business competence, technical competence, consulting skills, values and behavior competence, and personal development. Except personal development competence, we have all the dimensions that a CMC or a consultant is required in his or her life of providing consultancy service. One is business competence, which is focusing on the areas I have just mentioned, including the client business insight and consulting business insight. And then the technical competence, definitely needed from functional specialization point of view. And the consulting skills, like engagement management, the scope of client assignments, manages client and the other stakeholders' expectations, etc. And then values and behavior competence, which are directly linked to the ethics, professionalism, analytical skills, personal interaction. And as the lifelong learning concept requires, we also expect from the CMC consultant the personal development competence, which is continued learning and development. On the right-hand side, you can see the details of these, and I will go into those details, which are also available on the website. And then I will continue with values and behavior competence and open up ethics and professionalism a little bit, analytical skills, and then personal interaction. So these are clearly defined in the competence framework in the manual, and also the good practice examples are provided to make the assessors and IMCs understand the competence framework much better. And in the continued learning and development, we have the planning of self-development and showing the track record of personal growth through congresses, webinars, workshops, and some other learning opportunities. Again, on the right-hand side, you see details like, for example, to support analytical skills that we are looking for in the CMC capability and the competence sets, like problem solving, decision making, and recommendation and innovation. Like in the personal interaction, just to give examples, taking responsibility for own actions, handling complexity, as also emphasized by Nick. There are many situations in these days, for example, working under VUCA conditions, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous situations. This may also be the client's atmosphere and climate, and within the business of the client. And we have all, I am sure, experienced during the COVID-19 period, a number of VUCA examples, and we need to be more agile. We need to be more reactive to the situations which are uncertain and complex. So handling complexity is another competence that we are expecting from the CMCs or CMC candidates. Interacts effectively with others, demonstrates influencing skills, and demonstrates communication skills. Most of them have already been in the previous version, but the new ones or the updates are included considering the integration and transformation and the technology change and the big mega trends over the last couple of years or 10 years, so that we try to make the competence framework to be compatible with the current situation of the business life, let's say. So this is the structure in the original document. If we take the business insight and attitude as an example, so A1, client business insight, is the key competence, which is related to client functional and sectorial knowledge, and broken down into competences like client understanding, client business knowledge, and external awareness. Indeed, when we say external awareness, as you know, it may include clients' external world or the ecosystem of the client. So the consultant is expected to understand the ecosystem of the client, the environment, the competitive factors, social, technological, like mentioned in pest style analysis, and the ecosystem of the organization or the client. So these are more detailed in the CMC column. As you see, we have 3 levels, 3 columns as the foundation level, CMC level, the main focus is in the CMC level, and the profession leader. The profession leader are those who contribute to the profession and who have been also leading by example, applying management and business principles and skills in own business, and demonstrated expertise by external parties to advise on issues impacting own sector. So some IMCs may also choose recognizing those people who are professional leaders in their CMC process or certification process. In this slide, you see mainly the spirit or the content of ISO 27700, which is the consultancy service project standard to support the consultancy services, to describe the services with the 3 phases: contracting, execution, and closure. They are all supported by policies. And as most of you or all of you already know, that in ISO 27700, there is a section about policies, which includes a very, very good list. And then those policies can also be considered very relevant in the consultancy service business. And in contracting, the terms and conditions, roles and responsibilities, services and deliverables are described. And in the execution, the process of providing the consultancy service is described. And the closure is the closure of the project of consultancy service, including legal and contractual matters, final evaluation and improvement, etc. So this process approach is also reflected in the or matched with the competencies in the competence framework. So as Nick already mentioned, ISO 27700, the competences and code of conduct are combined in a nice way to make a big package for the CMC accreditation. So if you look at the same structure from another or bigger point of view, there is also a continuous improvement in all of these structure sections or parts. We, for example, have the CMC global breadth of knowledge, skills and abilities and directory as the definition of the whole set of competences. And then we have continual professional development, and we have reflection and feedback and continued personal learning and development, which is like PDCA approach, which is like continuous improvement approach. And in the CMC process, we have also included such approaches if the CMC candidate has this kind of PDCA in his or her life of improvement and business implementation. So this may seem a bit complicated, but we have some explanations and additional documents to emphasize that. Example, technical competence in the previous version is now expressed in client specialism and sectorial knowledge. Personal development competence is included in 1.2 and also 3.2 and in 4.3 in the new competence version of the competence framework. So there are more details in additional documents we can always provide. This looks a bit mixed. You don't have to see each of these lines, but the focus or the key message is that the 24 competencies are key here. 24 competencies from top to bottom in the middle column, and the right-hand column are the explanations, and including the good practices in CMC competences. Assessors are expected to focus on the middle column to assess the infrastructure of IMC or the documentation of IMC describing these 24 competences. So ICMCI's policy is that the ICMCI CMC standard is at a relatively high level, and it leaves a significant degree of freedom to member countries, the IMCs, in the detailed specification of their national CMC standards. But as it was mentioned by Nick, equivalence is key here. Equivalence is a key concept used for assessing compliance with the ICMCI CMC standard. And if equivalence is ensured, then reciprocity will be practically possible, so that the CMC labels by IMC will be equivalent to the CMC labels by IMC B. So ICMCI respects the historical, cultural, and legal diversity of its members. ICMCI fully accepts diversity in national CMC standards, so there are some freedom, some specific and historical, cultural, and legal diversity issues or concepts which are reflected in procedures in the valid differences. And ICMCI shall require that an institute demonstrates to the satisfaction of ICMCI that the institute's CMC standard requires at least the equivalent level of professionalism and ethics in candidates as the ICMCI standard. So the ICMCI set of competences is the core. It is the heart. And equivalence and the IMC documentation or structure will ensure the matching or compliance with the ICMCI CMC standard, and they may have their own specific additional concepts or additional practicalities as long as the ICMCI CMC standard is mapped with their equivalence concepts. So in this slide, I will just summarize and focus on some concepts. Maybe I'm just going through the slides and then I will take the questions at the end of this slide. So the main focus is 24 competencies, as I mentioned before, and all explanations in the competence framework documentation include good practices, and 51 examples, or all the examples which are good practices in the matching the lines to 24 competences are just examples from real life or from good practices. So the assessors are expected to focus on 24 competences and consider the good practices as examples and do not use them as a checklist. So there are some flexibility here, but the principles are around 24 competences. Then assessors are also expected to understand the big picture. Indeed, it's not expected only from the assessors, it is also expected from IMCs to describe their ecosystem, to describe their big picture, as long as the governance and organizational structure is concerned. And as you all know from the recent practices and experience over the COVID-19 and digitalization period over the last couple of years, the big picture of some organizations or many organizations have changed. This may be true for some IMCs having more or additional stakeholders, internal or external, maybe changes in their organizational structure, maybe changes or some slight changes in their governance system. So the more they explain their ecosystem, the more the assessors understand the IMCs. And stakeholders of IMCs are also part of the ecosystem. And the interaction of stakeholders between IMCs are part of this big picture. So respecting the principles of equivalence, culture, and local aspects is also expected from the assessors to understand or focus. And considering awareness on holistic and transformational thinking and UN SDG, as described or mentioned by Nick in the first half, UN SDG, the 17 goals are described in the resources of information, which will be sent to you by Huzaima. There are good links or websites on these. And those 17 sustainable development goals include a number of subjects about society, social responsibility, about law, about human rights, about environment, and global warming, a lot of subjects which are very, very hot subjects in these days. We also remember from the last couple of years that many organizations focus much more in sustainability, SDG subjects, and also ethics and code of conducts. So assessors or indeed CMCs are expected to be more aware of these subjects, and assessors from Icmci assessments are also expected to focus on these if IMC has given good enough attention on these subjects in their documentation and also in their processes of certification. So taking integration with Code of Conduct and ISO 27700, as we mentioned, as a combination of the Competence Framework, Code of Conduct, and ISO 27700 from process point of view, from technical point of view, and from personal behavior point of view. They are all representing a good integration of compact list of competences. And remembering the key dimensions of CMC Competence Framework, as mentioned before, business insight and attitude and the other subjects, I will not repeat them. They were just mentioned in my first slide, and with emphasis on the new concepts such as IT skills, even including artificial intelligence. And again, we don't expect them to be experts, but to be aware of their use, to be aware of the use of the benefits of those, and to be aware of the resources that the people may access, and awareness and ability to apply latest technology, interpersonal skills, and maybe more importantly, emotional intelligence. So I think that was all from my side, and thank you for your patience. And let me check the chat box. Could you put presentation on slideshow? Yes, I have already done this. So fortunately, so I stop sharing, and if you have questions, we still have about 15 minutes before we close the session.
Risto Ivanov from Icmci, from MCI 2000, North
Yes,
Macedonia.
please.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Risto.
Can I pose a question?
Yes, please, Risto. Yes.
Okay, I have only one question. There is the minimum number of competence that should be demonstrated in order some candidate to be designated as CMC, or have to demonstrate all 24 competences.
Good point. Good point. Let me just give the word to Nick from assessment point of view. As far as I know, there's no specific number for such purpose, but Nick can also support me to complete the answer. From my point of view, there is no such a number, 24, but in a reasonable level of assessment. What do you say, Nick, in this respect?
Yeah, I think we need to make a general comment and recommendation for assessors, whether they are CMC assessors within institutes or QAC assessors doing their triennial assessments. The key word is assessment, not audit.
Mhm.
Yes, we are checking for compliance. We are checking to make sure that a CMC candidate is worthy of being awarded the CMC designation. And yes, as QAC assessors, we are checking that an institute has the right processes and governance in place to show that it conforms with the ICMCI standards. But we are not doing a checklist, tick the box exercise in either type of assessment where we're saying, yep, 50% is a pass mark, or, you know, so many tick boxes checked is okay. That's not the principle on which assessment works. In doing a CMC assessment, we would expect a CMC assessor in an institute to be taking the big picture view of a candidate and actually just answering the very basic question, if I was a client, would I be happy to engage this consultant to do some work for me? And in answering that question, I will look at the 24 competencies and say, do I think this consultant has enough awareness and ability in that area to be able to satisfy me as a client? Now, it may be that, you know, not every consultant does everything. We have to be aware that some consultants carry out very specialized, specific activities, in which case an assessor needs to take that into account. But every consultant going for CMC should at least be able to demonstrate something about awareness and ability in all of the 24 competencies.
Yeah.
Even though when you look at the 51 examples, they may not be able to tick the box for every one of them. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the key word is assessment, not audit. Yeah.
Yes. So it is not a
I hope that
checklist.
answers the question for you, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So we are assessing, not checking the list. So in the queue, we have Gregory, Peter, and Alice. So we continue with Gregory.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate the presentation here. From IMC USA, the question I'd have is, will there be any impact or influence on the application process? It's pretty thorough now. The application process pretty well covers these areas that you've ticked off. And I don't know if there's anything else we need to do to add or subtract from the application process.
Okay, you're talking about the CMC application process.
Correct.
Gregory?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, to be honest, there really is no significant change to the CMC assessment process.
Mhm.
You know, the only change really is what the assessors are going to be more specifically looking at when they carry out the assessment. But the
Okay.
process stays as it was. It's a very robust process, and it works. We had a comment this morning that perhaps the matrix of preferred and agreed acceptable techniques, assessment techniques, might need some update, and we are going to have a look at that and consider it. We're not quite sure that it does need update, but we're going to review it anyway and have a look. But yeah, no, whatever is in your process at the moment, no significant change.
So there are some refinements,
Yeah, we've seen the refinements. That looks good.
Yeah.
So Peter, please.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Thanks for the summary. It helped a lot on understanding the details. I've got one question though regarding the professional leader designation. We try to interpret the competence framework, and especially that column, and it was kind of controversial because if you read into the details, then you have the feeling that this seems to be like a different certificate than the CMC certificate, which I'm not aware of existing.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
so if you can clarify that.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
Thank you so much for raising the
okay.
question, Peter.
Yeah. Okay,
In
Nick.
fact, you know, the profession leader designation has always been there since 2014, but it was hidden away in another document. It is not another Icmci designation or award. It's been put in there to enable an institute to recognize among its membership those who have made a conspicuous contribution towards the profession in their country and within their institute. So it's an opportunity for an institute to recognize those of their members who really have made a significant contribution to the profession or to the institute or whatever. And that could be that, you know, maybe they've served on committees and the boards and made significant changes in sustainability, in membership numbers, in whatever. Yeah. It may be that they have been very significant in training activities and are considered by the Institute as a definite thought leader. You know, the sort of person that people go to for their wisdom. So it's not a generalized CMCI qualification. It's one which an institute could take up for itself and you know, and give its own special award for.
Yes.
Nick, I believe that many of the IMCs already use that, and they call them fellow CMCs.
Yeah.
Yes. So indeed, there is another benefit of using this title or this position, whatever we call, it gives us the opportunity to describe the CMC level much more comprehensively and detailed, because as you look at the structure of the document, on the left-hand side we have the foundation, we have CMC, and then we have the leader level. So this gives us the opportunity or possibility to describe the CMC level fully in a comprehensive way. And in addition, as Nick has mentioned, gives the opportunity to IMCs to recognize some exceptional or thought leader levels in their network, but it is not compulsory.
If I may just
yes, please.
Give a comment on that.
Yes, please.
That actually this was our final interpretation, even though we weren't quite sure. But this was our final interpretation of what the document was meant to be. So like a maturity sequence, and
yes.
there and in the middle of that CMC being defined as as something in the middle. But the comment I was gonna make is that this reminded us of one of our old plans, which we are actually going to implement, and I'll be interested in the assessor's opinion when we get to it, is that we're going to introduce an alternative route to achieving the CMC certificate, which will result in the same CMC certificate, but with a different path. So so we'll have a different set of requirements targeting profession leaders. but not
Yes.
necessarily with those boxes or with those definitions of the competencies that you have in that column.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but as those people tend to have kind of the different preferences in terms of
Exactly.
time commitment in the
Exactly.
in achieving the award, etc. So that's what we figured out of this. But we of course understand that that's not what you meant, but that's what we did at the end. So that's
Exactly.
It'll be very interesting to see how that works out, Peter.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
Jalal, we have 3 more hands raised now. So
Yes, and about four minutes to finish. So Alice, Alice, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to keep it short. I've been doing this for a very, very long time. And I think that this is a radical change, a complete rewrite of the competence framework. And I'm actually looking forward to seeing the document, because I think it's going to make it easier as an assessor, an institute assessor, and I think it's going to make it even easier for a CMC assessor to determine whether or not the consultant is actually, practicing at the level that we require. So congratulations on that hard work, but well done.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As you say, it's a radical approach or change. I just would like to complement that with the emphasis that it is an assessment. It is not an audit. This is why we are emphasizing the list of competences is not a checklist. It is supported by the good practices, but it is an assessment at the end of the day. Okay, so
Okay,
Nsombi.
I think we should take Nsombi's question now.
Yes, Nsombi.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's afternoon in my part of the world. It's night somewhere where you are, maybe morning. Thank you, Nick and Chalal, for that really engaging presentation. As a member of the PSC, I was part of this process, but
Yes.
you know, when you work on things in bits and pieces, when it all comes together like that, it's really amazing, amazing work. And I'm so much clearer now on the path forward. I have 2 questions. One
Yes,
has to do with the assessment of our institute. And there are some best practices I know in institutes. And I like the fact that you are asking for us to have an EDMS. And we have been looking at one for CIMC. And we're looking at the open source one, Alfresco, where we can store all of our mission critical documents in and have that accessible to anybody. But is there another EDMS that has worked well for other institutes that you're aware of that you could introduce us to, so that we could explore it as we're looking at preparing ourselves for our 23 assessment?
So Nick, as it is related to assessment, I leave it to you, Nick, and I will add something at the end.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry. I just had to get up and close my window because my next door neighbour decided to mow his lawn, and I couldn't hear a word of what was being said. And Sambi, I'm sorry, could you just repeat what the question
EDMS,
was?
electronic document management system, so that we can have a central repository that we can give access privileges to different persons. I was wondering if there was one that is popular among IMCs.
Oh.
We're looking at Alfresco, it's an open source, but is there one that's popular to IMCs that we could look at?
The answer I have is I don't know, but why don't we find out?
All right.
I'm sure that there will be some institutes who would be very happy to give advice.
Awesome.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily require any specific app to do it, and Zombie. I'm sure, you know, if you've got it certainly helps if the institute has its own system online, but I know not every institute does.
Yes.
So there are many ways of doing it, and I wonder if Chalal, we already found this morning we need to write 1 or 2 extra guidance documents about things like IT capability and so on. Maybe we should try to come up with something on the document management for institutes. I mean, Rima will correct me on this, but we do have, obviously, in our new Icmci system that we bought the new software app, there is that capability, but there will be limitations on the basis of the confidentiality that we must exercise on the behalf of institutes. So that may make it difficult for any central repository of documents, but I don't know whether maybe that also might be possible.
Okay. It depends on the users. Sorry, Nasambi. I was going to add to what Nick said. It all depends on the number of users that can access all the documents. So that has to do with following proper, let's say, procedures with regards to handling the documents of all IMCs. But for example, at ICMCI, we will be using Zoho. It is not just for documents, it's also for processes. So maybe you can take a look at that.
Okay, we will be assigning access privileges, various access privileges to different persons, but at the very least, everybody would have view privilege, because I find that the more people who understand the process, the requirements for the assessment, the easier it will be for those of us who are involved in the process. And my approach is to curate a team of members, active members in CIMC to be part of this assessment process so that we can start preparing from now. Our assessment is going to be 23, and I'm really glad to see that we have all of these documents and guidelines to be able to do it. I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to ask about this CMC assessment. I really love this new competency framework and the way it's been laid out. It's going to make it a lot easier for those of us who are assessors who do oral assessment of the CMC candidates. And I have found over the years that there is inconsistency, and that happens in all situations where you have human beings doing assessments using specific guidelines and standards. We find it with auditors, Nick, right? And so I think this is going to really close some of those gaps, because we've had situations in our IMC where a very competent, experienced, value-added consultant has failed the orals or has not gotten through the orals, which causes a lot of pain and concern on the part of those of us who know the value of these persons. And then there are others who are way less competent, way less experienced, who have been through the process and have been given the CMC credential. Yeah. So I really do like this new competency framework. And is there a practice, as a best practice, where a consultant candidate, a CMC candidate, has gone through the orals and the assessment team has I don't want to use the word fail because it's really not fail, but they haven't gotten through? Is there any way that we can revisit the scoring and the reasons why they gave the scores? Especially when we know that the consultant is a good consultant and a great candidate.
Yeah, and Sambi, there is, I mean, that every institute should have an appeals procedure. And that appeals procedure should allow for a review of the processes which have been followed. So that's
what if the candidate does not appeal, or what if the candidate is not interested in appealing or going through the process?
Well, if they're interested in CMC, I would suggest they ought to be interested in appealing. I mean, I know we all recognize sometimes there are differences in the way different assessors do things. Let me give you an example of what I think is good practice, and that is all the QAC assessors have a regular experience exchange session, and we actually held one last week, and it's very useful for QAC assessors to share their experiences and best practice, and I think that helps to get some consistency between our QAC assessors as well. Now, I don't know whether that may be a possibility that we might consider for doing that amongst CMC assessors within institutes as well. That really is the best suggestion I have.
Thank you.
We used to do it in the UK Institute. In fact, we used to run, I forget what they were called, but they were like benchmarking sessions for assessors, where we gave them case studies and asked them to do a case, to do an assessment and come up with an answer, and then compared what each of them had done. And we managed to get a lot of consistency and consensus amongst our assessors that way.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for all the questions and for your patience and interest. And I think we need to close, and we are out of running the time. Thank you very much for participation and contributions, everybody. Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.